I'm not quite sure the number because I started to try to dig through it before here, and I think we lost 54, technical difficulties on 56. Hard to determine what this is today, but
59, sir.
all right, I'll jot it down. 59, and still a primary source for supreme being through modern hunting and gathering, nutritional modalities, fitness modalities, and mentalities. It gets sloppy. It gets a little bit sloppy. Sometimes it's midday, midweek. Sometimes it's Friday at night. Sometimes it's Friday, midday, midweek. But it's almost in keeping with what we've been talking about too, because this concept of the difficult thing to do is always to stick to a specific course. If specificity by definition would be more difficult than fluidity, I would say in most circumstances. Would you agree?
Say that again.
Specificity by definition is more difficult than fluidity or free flow in most cases. A garden, for example, is not going to just grow nutritious vegetables out of nowhere. You have to tend to the garden. It's a process, it's a step. It requires disciplinary steps throughout that process. Same thing with a farm. Whereas if you just allow the whatever to grow on the if you just carve out a plot of land and let whatever grow, what's going to be more nutritious and more valuable to your body? The one that you put hard work into and adhere to specific orders of operations and specificity, or the one that you just allowed to grow? What would you say?
Yeah, I mean, you got to plant the seeds, right?
Beyond
Oftentimes,
planting the seeds, you have to know the. I mean, it's like, and I'm kind of let's say I'm having a moment I'm glad that analogy just sort of came to mind with regard to what we're working on and what we're doing and the concept for today, because I didn't think about that before. I mean, not only do you have to plant the seed, that's one thing, but do you have to know the right soil chemistry? Anything I've ever put into the ground died. I mean, not everything, I shouldn't say, but like I can't. I've always struggled with cultivating a flourishing garden, let's say, because I as I dug into it more often, it's more what's the soil temperature. You can't just plant any. I didn't realize you can't just plant any seed at any time. It has to be, it's region specific, it's timing specific, it's you don't just water it all the time. Some plants require more water than others, and like all of these specific things to lead to a cultivated land that's nourishing for the human being. It's difficult.
yeah, there are some directions that need to be followed, or to your point, things will not grow. And I've had that happen a few times. Planting in the wrong. I was trying to grow hops for a bit, and no clue what happened to those. Those just in the soil, and that's where they remain, dormant seeds. But I didn't, to your point, do the research in terms of when it's supposed to grow. And I mean, although, I mean, there are some natural patterns throughout this, right? Like, for instance, here we are in spring, right? Spring is upon us. The days are longer, it's warmer, rain is abating a bit. And primarily, this is a great time to plant most crops. But there are certain ones in the wintertime, right? Certain cruciferous vegetables and such that perform better during that time, which I've not had much luck with. But now is the time for planting.
Now, indeed, is the time for planting. And we've had a couple weeks since the last cast, and just examining ourselves and examining where we've been at Left Coast Caveman Way of Life, leftcoastcaveman.com, and what we're building and what we're doing and what we're promoting is this path. And this dichotomy that we talk about within the last couple weeks is the idea of toggling. While every human being is on a path in life, toggling between this dichotomy of pleasure and pain as a way to put it into the most broadly casted terminology. I would say it's not exactly that easy, of pleasure and pain, but that which and everything that stems off that which is nourishing to your path, that which moves you forward, versus that which does not move you forward. And it's not always so cut and dry that like pleasure always doesn't lead to progress on the path and pain always does. It's not that easy, but often what I'm finding within our three scopes of modalities, a nutritional modality, fitness modality, and mentality, and what we've sort of been talking about over the past couple weeks and giving examples of it throughout the conversations that we've been having, whether it was one with somebody with whom I'm acquainted and they said, you know, this person's always struggling with weight or with fitness, but every time it gets hard, that's when they indicate to quit. Or with nutrition and people who are constantly eating for the sake of pleasure, not having a healthy relationship with food from like a nourishing standpoint. And just kind of examining this dichotomy. And I never thought about it in terms of the concept of the farm that, what was his name? The guy that did like the 7 rules for success or something like that. The principle of the farm. Are you familiar with this? It's Stephen Covey, I think, brought it to the self-help genre, but it makes a lot of sense. It's like no matter what it is that you're attempting to build, or whether it's that a fitness routine or a nutritional modality, a dietary restriction, or a nutritional protocol, it implies that there's going to be a little bit of discomfort. And the key cave way of life, in the way we look at discomfort or pain, it seems to be that we always find ourselves looking at it in a way of that is in itself almost a ticket to next level. If we're striving towards supreme being, inviting some level of discomfort along with it, understanding that ultimately that does lead you into a place of happiness, more fulfillment, more pleasure, more like true pleasure in life, rather than like making pleasure the thing, which ultimately leads to less discomfort or more discomfort in life. I think that's kind of what we were discussing, wasn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely. And there must be a way. And I think a lot of us probably feel at one point or another some sort of transitional state where you seek out that pain. I mean, not in some masochistic way, but where the pain, like there's solace in pain there, because you know that's essentially like the thing that germinates the seed, right? That's that the X factor you need for growth to happen is the pain. And there is, I believe, a way to get to a point where you enjoy like the process, the pain. And it's almost like a signpost that tells you you're on the right way, you're going the right direction. And people that are more pleasure oriented or, along that way, I think it also manifests in different physical attributes and mental maladies where you don't feel good. And you may be under some sort of magnetism to pleasure, but there's these signals that are emitting that will definitely let you know, manifest that it's not the right path at all.
Well, and it's challenging too. I was having a good conversation with somebody last night who's doing the 75 hard. Have you heard of this fitness and nutritional modality?
No.
It's called 75 hard, and I don't know the ins and the outs of it. I should look it up, but if anybody Googled 75 hard, we could even do it right now. It's something about 75 straight days of sticking to a specific, they refer to it as diet, we refer to it as nutritional modality. A specific fitness routine. I think you have to do something every day, and you have to take a picture every day or something like that for 75 days, and you drink a certain amount of water for that many days, and then it kind of carries you along in that way. And of course that's challenging. That's why it's called 75 hard, I think. And it might be called 75 hard for other reasons, but this person was at a winery with family and friends that during that duration, and her approach was to adhere to the plan and say, all right, I can't drink wine. It's like no alcohol for 75 days. I can't, I can't, and part of it is tracking. We've talked about know thy numbers on the cast, and that's important. And so tracking everything. And so because that was a challenge, this individual like brought protein bars with her to this event, and that's where I think it becomes a bit of a challenge, and why we refer to it as like this toggling between pleasure and pain, because I think it's a way of like you have to examine your life holistically. And we talk a lot about intentional eating, intentional nutrition, intentional fitness, and in your mentality piece, because I think a lot of people get trapped into one side or the other. Like either you're living a life full of debauchery and you have all of these lofty goals for what you want to accomplish, but as soon as it gets hard, you quit, or you go the David Goggins route and think that like everything has to be pain and suffering in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish in life. And I think that it's more about this toggling between, and knowing that what is the key characteristic of your life. Like, where are you spending the majority? If you were to develop some kind of a ledger, pleasure on one side, pain on the other, like what is influencing your decision making most of the time? And I'd say something like a program that brings you on a 75 days and then drops you off. What does that do for you? It doesn't teach you this toggling mechanism. Like, whereas what we're trying to really promote is this: what is the key characteristic of your life and your decision making? What's actually guiding you? It can't be one or the other. It has to be this toggling in between. And I can understand where that could leave people with a little bit of ambiguity, but I think that it's more about understanding that it's okay to live to have a little debauchery in your life. But what is the main thrust of what you're doing and why? And know that every time things get hard, if you quit, or if you reach for the bottle, or if you reach for the pills as a way to try to make yourself feel better quickly, that'll ultimately make you feel worse. But if your primary mechanism is, I'm going to sweat till I'm wet every day, I'm going to implement the LCC way of life, I'm going to be on a plan, I'm going to be regimented, and by default be more often than not choosing the difficult path, you're going to be happier. But that shouldn't mean that, like, if you seek a little pleasure now and again, that should be a bad thing.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of those, enter in the day and that's your protocol, and you're doing like this cleanse, or I mean, time and place. Like I'm not really big on that. I'm more of a consistent, throughout the ages, and what is it, 95% of the time doing the right thing, 5% of the time, like, there's some aberrations there. Maybe gonna jump into debauchery mode or whatnot. And like my question is, like, what happens after day 75? Now it's off the rails. I mean, where are you now? And if you didn't pick up that habit, which, by the way, that 75-day habit, maybe that's not sustainable. Maybe that's not the right answer. And so all of a sudden you hit that goal, and like, now what? I could see it as being a tool and a source. Maybe that does work for some people. They really need that to get on track, and then to adjust from 75 days and beyond in some sort of hybridization of eating and whatever disciplinary aspect that 75 days held, and you kind of make up your own as you go. So maybe there's some utility in that, but I'm just not a big fan of it. I quite frankly don't think it works. And if it did work, because there's enough of those programs out there, and there's not enough really fit and awesomely achieving people that are just, if it was working, we'd see a signal. And I don't think it is. It sounds gimmicky to me. It sounds like something a lot of people fail at, and not a fan. But to each their own, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's exactly. I mean, clearly we're not a fan because we position what we do as a way of life, and it's exactly that. It's day one is also day 100 and 100,000. It's, I don't even know if that's possible in an existence. I'll have to do the math on that, but does one live actually 100,000 lives or 100,000 days in their lifetime? But encapsulating it into a specific time period, I can understand where that level of structure is important for people. But what we're attempting to build is a time bound structure within a system of modalities and way of life, nutritional modalities for specific purposes, And sometimes that's pleasure, sometimes that's pain. If it's a fasting protocol, for example, for a specific intention, I mean, obviously that creates a little bit of discomfort for a purpose, but ultimately it's awareness and intention that matters, and that's sustaining over time. It's not this. It's in that implies the toggling mechanism. It has to be captured in a, well, what's my purpose in this? Why am I doing this? And for us, it's like nutritional modalities are always tied to primitive way of life or a specific protocol that you're doing for a specific purpose, whether that's gaining strength, gaining muscularity, or gaining or losing, burning fat, becoming more agile, becoming faster, or increasing your cardiovascular functions. I mean, everything can have specificity within that, and that's where the toggling comes in. And sometimes it's a nutritional modality is I'm out at a winery with friends and family, and I should be able to just let go and enjoy it, and that's okay too, and that's why we build in this toggling mechanism. And we discussed this sort of with regard to like what is rehab short for? Rehabilitation centers, and just this idea of even within some of those systems, they imply like, hey, this is a way of life that like you continue. You're not going to just learn this information and then everything's okay. Like you need to be teaching information that's applicable ongoing throughout life. And it's the same with what we're doing with nutritional modalities and fitness modalities. And that's why like our fitness modalities too, that we'll be sharing, we'll be building out leftcoastcaveman.com. We just got our graphic assets, so we'll be using those and putting those on leftcoastcaveman.com. And the program, the first program, Primal Primers, that we'll be bringing out sometime after that first couple weeks in May, as we figure out how to put it out there in a format, making it more accessible and practical for people, which is what we do at leftcoastcaveman.com. We take these information, these ideas, and make them practical and accessible to people, whether it's biohacking, these fitness programs, like what are the extractions from a program like a 75 hard that we can implement into a way of life that people can use. Perhaps it is abstaining from alcohol for a specific period of time. What's the value in that? Why is that valuable? Like teaching people that along our path and giving them tools that they can use to carry it along with them on their path. But I think it has to tie into a greater purpose, and that's what I love. I mean, Left Coast implying modern technology. I'll get this hand out of here. Caveman obviously implying the primitive, and that's why I get excited about what we do, because even like the movements, it's not just a strength building. The Primal Primer movements are all about, or Primal Primer movements or activities that what you do with your body. It's what we mean by fitness modality. It's not like an exercise program. It's like, what are you doing physically with your body, and why is that important? The things that we teach in the Primal Primers, for example, are things that you should do throughout your life. There'll never be a time where sunlight isn't important. Getting out in the sunlight or moving every day isn't important. Or, I mean, so it can't just be done for 75 days. It has to be done for a lifetime, and instilling that in people, because we are still primitive people with primitive basic needs. And that's the, sorry, that sucks. Right when I was on a rant too. We're primitive people with primitive basic needs, and that changes over time depending on our environment, but ultimately like getting back to and re-engineering or reverse engineering those things and putting them in our program are things that people can take and apply to their life ongoing.
Yeah.
And it's yeah, man. I mean, I think in where we couch this out, or where we, I think where we captured this best this week was our conversation on the mentality piece, and thinking about human beings. Like, have you ever thought about? There's three things I was thinking about specifically. One of them we talked about already, and two of them we haven't. But thinking about that, people used to consider Mozart entertainment. That people would gather by the thousands that would go and see an orchestra. And now, I mean, people still do. You can go to the orchestra, but it's a very select group of people that go. And people used to read books. People used to write letters. People used to dictate letters and do poetry, and this was common pastime behaviors. And now what do people do? Scroll on TikTok for, quick 5-second videos or whatever these things are. And we talked a little bit about that, like the difference between the tangible activities that people did versus this instant gratification. And that's again it's the same dichotomy of pleasure versus pain. Like, are we dopamine driven? Are we driven to get these little hits of pleasure throughout the day? And what does that do to the human body? What does that do to your physical body, fitness modality? What do you want, like a 15-minute video that you can just put on and be done and call that work? What does that do to your mentality? How are you cognitively restructuring your brain as a human being to just constantly feed off of these quick snippets of information rather than reading a book, discovering what's in there, writing about it? What's your argument within it? How are you adding to it? All of these things is kind of in keeping with our caveman way of life, left coast caveman, using these tools to reverse engineer that and bring us back to a more primitive state. Because I think there's value in that.
Yeah. I mean, there's no doubt that there's a degradation in the stimuli, the quality of stimuli that we're exposed to on a daily basis. And I think we're only beginning to scratch the surface of what type of impact this has on the psyche, on the mind, on the body. But no doubt, I mean, the difference between opening up a book and extracting information through reading and integrating with that information and creating your own information and sharing that through a dialogue or through written text or whatnot is diametrically different than a tic-tac video of 5 seconds, and then you're cast upon this wave of the next video and the next one, all curated via these companies and to whatever means. But yeah, I mean, there is certain, I mean, I feel it that not that I'm even on social media, but I feel just a degradation in general of my attention span. It's harder to sit and read for 30 minutes than it has ever been. And like, what is that an artifact of? I'm not sure. I mean, obviously it just requires a bit more adjustments and discipline and planning and, cultivating that garden where you can receive the information and integrate it. But I mean, as we talked about before, like the importance of reading, like think about this, all of the human knowledge that has ever been created can be found in books. I mean, that to be said, it can be found online as well, but there's a lot of traps out there online. You might go searching out something. Next thing you know, you're checking emails. Next thing, I mean, you can be tugged in so many different directions, not by your own volition. I mean, that's where it was kind of cool back in the day. You go to a library and you search out a book, and usually you have some direction, and you might even use the Dewey Decimal System to find out. I'm just kidding, man. I've never used a Dewey Decimal System. I think that was on its way out when I was like in first grade. But once you do select that book for whatever reason, right? You got that book, you read the back, the cover looks cool, and you're into this, whatever it might be. You're looking at some Musashi, you're looking at some Dostoevsky, you're looking at some science, some Joseph Campbell, whatever it might be, right? But you gotta work to extract that information. You gotta put in that energy, and you don't have to via this passive bullshit that's found in these phones or tablets or computers. It's like there's so much sabotage out there when it comes to allowing yourself to spend time unguided on these devices. And we thought about reading, like how many books, Mark, how many books do you read a year, would you say, if you had to estimate? I know you're probably more of a reader than I am at this point, but
maybe 10 if I'm lucky.
Yeah, I mean, that's decent though. And I like to set up systems in my life, like protocols to put together to essentially dissect time and set it on as a schedule, if you will. And 20 pages, if you read 20 pages a day, 7 days a week, you can get through 20 books a year. So you're roughly reading, and who knows like what your schedule looks like on your pages of reading. 10 pages a day is 10 books a year. And when you reduce it to the ridiculousness, I mean, how long does 10 pages take to read? 15 minutes, 20 minutes. If you're actively reading and really paying attention and, think about that. You could put down 10 books a year. 10 books. Now, I'm embarrassed to admit that this year I've read one. So, we're in Q2 right now. 4 months in, I've read one book. Now, granted, I just finished one right now, so the average is climbing a bit. But, well, okay, how do I fix that? Because we all know, like, that's important. That information that you're actively taking in, that's the kind of information that stays. That's the kind that jellifies. That's the kind that you can share out, that you can build upon. Not so much as like these little quick videos or YouTube videos that you might watch in passing. And so just the power of that, like what you can do with 10 books a year. I mean, of course you have to choose wisely, just like with anything, right? You have to have a plan. Like, what are you looking for? Like, what are you trying to learn about? Like, and as a man, as a human, in this day and age, as, leaders, we should be challenging ourselves to be expanding our, what do they call it? Continued education units, CEUs. I mean, learning doesn't stop at college, and right now, even now, that's in question. Like, how much you really learned when you were in college? Now might be different now. And it's like you have to plot your own course and be your own instructor. And lucky for us, there's so many resources out there where you can learn from the greats of all of history. So you got to choose wisely. But that's something I'm challenging myself with, is 10 pages a day. And I'm not going to say it's life changing, but I know I'm going to get through many more books this year. And I'm happy to announce that, like, for myself, and things that I can share with my cohort, with my son, and just overall broadening my range of knowledge and what I can do with that. I think that's exciting. And, I would challenge a lot of folks out there to take an inventory of what your reading looks like these days. Do you read? I mean, how many people do you know that don't read? And that's a crazy thought to me. Most of the people I know, outside of you, man, I don't think I know anybody that reads a book, at all. Go on public transportation, go on a plane. Do you see anybody reading a book any longer? I mean, maybe they're doing it on some sort of tablet device, but I don't think so. I think there's a huge transition going on right now, and I don't think that's a transition for the better. Hard stop.
I'm glad it took. I mean, this has 8 minutes left, but I think we've figured out the toggling mechanism between pleasure and pain, and sort of, I think you just nailed it out of the park and opened up a plethora of ideas that I want to touch on as a way to wrap this cast into a single, an all-encompassing cave implementation of this idea, whether it's nutrition, whether it's fitness, whether it's mentality. And that is, it's kind of multifaceted, but systematizing the challenge into your life. That is the toggle mechanism. As long as you're part of a system, and that's what we're attempting to build at this leftcoastcaveman.com, is that systematic toggle mechanism. There's going to be debauchery, but there has to be a significant shift towards more challenge. Everybody should be able to answer the question, what are your life books? What are the books that really have shaped and changed your life? And not only reading, everybody should be writing a book. Why should somebody be writing a book? Why should everybody be writing a book? Because a book includes like a philosophy or your stance in life, and in it that would imply that you have some sort of a purpose that you're working towards. We talked about this difference between human being versus human becoming. This human becoming implies that you're having to, like you said, it doesn't, I would argue that unlearning what you learned in college to then now learn what it is about life that you want to put your stake in the ground and become something. Well, you need information, and that information has to be a wide net of ancient wisdom, new information. That's why we're Left Coast Caveman. Left Coast implies, look, we see that there's value in TikTok. We don't want to bash everything that's out there. I mean, there is kind of value, and every once in a while I'll scroll through something and I get ideas, but be careful. I mean, or I should never say be careful. Be aware. A lot of that information is controlled by money, and it requires hard work and a body of knowledge and academic prowess to put a book together. And so just think about it. Who are you going to take your car? I mean, if your car breaks down, you're going to take it to a mechanic that, hey, I got a bag of wrenches in my garage and I know a thing or two, so I've screwed on a few nuts and bolts. Or you're going to take it to somebody who spent years in time and study on learning mechanics. That's the same thing with regard to where are you getting your source of knowledge? Is it some kid on TikTok that can put a cool idea up, or somebody who has a list of sources that they studied and learned and put information out and had to tactfully think about how to communicate that information? And so this idea that wisdom grows in life, I mean, you're never growing old, you're growing more wise, and you should be full of more life as you age and not less. And you should think every year, every moment, every day as an opportunity to gain more of that knowledge. And I love the systematizing of the mentality piece, which is 20 pages a day, 10 pages a day, whatever that is. Divorce the device, get rid of something to add that in, to add in time. Just surround yourself with books, have it on you, read at stoplights, read while you're in the bathroom. I mean, that's the throne in my old house used to be full of magazines and books and these kind of things. But yeah, I mean, thinking about everybody should be writing, everybody should be reading. These are things that obviously only continue to gain wisdom as you grow old. And whether it's nutritional modality, fitness modality, mentality, looking for ways to systematize, have a system of nutrition. Your system implies that you know the ins and the outs, the nuts and bolts. We talked about know thy numbers. The fitness modality, have a system. Systematize it. Know what your primal primers are, what you do every single day without a doubt. These are things that you check off every day, and then have a routine on top of that. Whether it's mobility, for you it's a lot of combat training, jiu-jitsu. You have that committed to the calendar, like we discussed also on the cast. But that's a systemizing the challenge in your life. Sign up for something, do something. And then of course the mentality piece, adding in that time of study, have accountability partners and that kind of thing. So that'd be the overall cave meditation, I would say, or the cave implementation of this whole thing. And with the last 3 minutes of the cast, I hand it over to you.
Yeah. Well, one thing that stuck out to me, man, was divorce the device. I think that's a great slogan right there. I really do. I mean, these devices are great, don't get me wrong, but put it down from time to time. And I almost think that maybe it's a little aggressive to say this, but it's like our responsibility to continue to acquire knowledge, like as a man, as a leader. I mean, anyone, but I mean, think about that. Like if you're challenged with innovation, if you're challenged with leading a group, a sales team, whatever that might be, like you should be in a constant state of knowledge acquisition, right? It's almost like your imperative, like it's your responsibility, to have something just in casual, to chat with somebody over a beer and like be able to talk about something you're reading right now or something interesting you've come across. How many people are devoid of like these, like the art of conversation, the art of adding something to it, some material that you're working through right now that's interesting, or something you could synergize with knowledge of the past with the current contemporary of the left coast. I mean, part of why I read, one of the more, I would say, nascent reasons why I read is I like to have conversations with my son and talk through some of these things. I'm reading about the supergut, I'm understanding microbiota, and I'm thinking, how can I influence his development? Maybe influence some sort of new protocols with like making my own yogurt and providing him with these nutrients and these ancient strains and how this could affect his life, and talking through why it's important to eat these things and why more vegetables and such are important, because that's the prebiotic fibers that you can. So anyways, long story short, like if I didn't read this book, I wouldn't know, right? Like how would I come across this information? I just wouldn't, generally speaking. I had to search it out for whatever reason. That, some information led me to that. And now I'm reading that book, and now I'm working through that material. And now I'm in the stage of creating my own material based off that, my own implementations. And now I have something to talk about also, which I couldn't think of a worse thing in this world is to be boring. Those people. Those are the people that talk about weather.
And that was what I had jotted down. We got 30 seconds. So I'd say be interesting, divorce the device, read books, systematize it, write books, and most importantly, keep it cave. Keep it left, Ghost Gate. All right, man. I'll get this thing posted up.
Yep.